So in the last video, I predicted what I feel Scott Robertson might select for his All Blacks squad. Now, the comments were a bit mixed. Some did agree, some weren't too happy with my selections. I got called a plonker, and that was by my mum before I even started the recording. But in this video, I am going to be selecting my All Blacks squad. Now, I've got quite a few different names compared to what I feel like Razor could go with. So without further ado, let's jump in to my All Black squad, starting with the props. And right off the bat, I have got a different name to that prediction the other day, and that is Ollie Norris. Now, I did mention about him in the third propping position. I actually gave it to Xavier Numia in that Robertson prediction, but I do think based off statistics and what we've seen from Ollie Norris throughout 2025, he would be pretty unlucky not to be and at the All Blacks environment. Now, we've also got the clarification that Tamaiti Williams, he is back training with the squad. He's going to be good to go for the final this weekend. So it's great news, not just for the Crusaders, but also for the ABs. But someone else who will be playing in that final, Ollie Norris. He's had a 92% tackle completion rate throughout this year with 116 tackles made. He's beaten 12 defenders. He has only conceded 7 penalties, which does sound like quite a few, but you got to remember when you are a prop, it's pretty hard not to give away the occasional penalty. He's played 670 minutes this year, and last year, just for comparison, he played 342 and also gave away those 7 penalties. So he's got a lot better. He's pretty handy when it comes to running the ball. And just in the quick comparison, Xavier Numia, he's given away 15 penalties throughout this year. Same with Josh Fusitua, who I think is also another guy that they could be looking at, as he has tackled at 94% throughout this season, making 174. But I am going Ollie Norris as the first prop. The second, it is Tamaiti Williams. And the third, Lucy, while we're at it, I have gone with Ethan de Groot. So Tamaiti Williams, he scored 5 tries throughout 2025. He is tackling at 87% with 90 tackles made. He's had 5 penalties against him, so a couple less than Ollie Norris. He's made 7 dominant tackles, as you would expect for a guy of his size and stature. And I do think after Razor found out that Tamaiti was going to be okay after that knee injury, I'm sure he was a very happy man, as him being in the All Blacks front row can certainly make the difference. Ethan de Groot, I do think that compared to last season, he's been a little bit more quiet for the Highlanders, but one thing can't be denied, and that is when that man puts on the All Blacks kit, he seems to find that next level. Highlanders, of course, they've been struggling a little bit for the last few years, but de Groot, when he gets in the right environment with the right players around him, does seem to be able to really step up. So those are the 3 loose heads. Now we look at the tight heads. I've gone Tyrell Lomax, Basilio Tosi, and also Fletcher Null. So Tyrell Lomax, he's only played the 451 minutes throughout the season, and the reason for that is they are rotating between him and Basilio Tosi. Normally Lomax comes off around that 50-minute mark. He's only conceded 2 penalties throughout this season though, whereas Basilio Tosi, he's had 396 minutes played throughout 2025. He has conceded 7 penalties, but he's also beaten 7 defenders. And with him joining the All Blacks last year, I do think that there's a good chance that they'll keep him in the environment and could really be a super sub. I mean, you look at the size of him and Tamaiti Williams. If those two were your front row propping down, it would be a pretty nervous time for the opposition. Fletcher Null single-handedly has almost played as many minutes as Lomax and Basilio Tosi with 794. He has made 92% of his tackles with 134, and he has only conceded 3 penalties. So when you talk about scrummaging, which of course you should for your props, Fletcher Null, he's pretty safe to have in that scrum, as he's going to win your penalties. He's also not going to go down too often, and when he does, of course, he picks himself right back up and normally wins the penalty back in the scrum taking place afterwards. So those are my 6 props. Now, I do think in terms of the tight head prop position, had Marcel Renata not been injured in the semi-final, I actually think he could have had a decent crack of being somewhere amongst the names that we have been mentioning here. I do also think that George Bower, like I said in the Scott Robertson selection video, I don't think will be a mile off the environment for the All Blacks as injury cover, as well as maybe just training with the squad as well. But we move on now to the hookers. Now, in my Scott Robertson prediction, I did go Cody Taylor, Simasoni Taukei'aho, and also George Bell. But in my squad, I am going Cody Taylor, Samisoni Taukei'aho, and I am going with Asafo Aumua. I do think that compared to last year, Aumua has certainly not been as busy. Now, he has had a few injuries to deal with, so that certainly doesn't help. Just looking at a bit of a comparison, 5 defenders beaten this year for Asafo Aumua. Last year, he did beat 30. Now, he is not the only man in this squad that I'm picking based off previous performances rather than just in the current, but I do think he's one of those players that are just too good to leave out of there. He is dangerous. He can make huge tackles when he wants to and will always be physical out there on the park. Samisoni Taukei'aho, he has had 9 tries throughout this season, 19 defenders beaten. He's a bit the same as Asafo Aumua in terms of that dangerous ball running that he offers, as well as getting in to those breakdowns. And then you've got Cody Taylor for the Crusaders, the experience. He's had 3 tries this year, which is maybe a little bit light compared to what we are used to seeing for Taylor. Last year was absolutely phenomenal at international level. The Crusaders, they've got the most accurate line out in the Super Rugby Pacific competition with 88.6%. Now, Taylor is not the only man throwing those. Big shout out, of course, to Ioane Moananu, who I do think, if he plays like he did this year and can find some more minutes, could find himself in the All Blacks within the next few years. But those are the hookers. So now we do move on to the locks. I have just selected the 4, Scott Barrett, Patrick Tuipulotu, Tupavai, and also Fabian Holland. So for Scott Barrett, looking through at his stats, there were quite a few interesting ones, I do have to say, because the man gets a bit of a reputation at times for giving away silly penalties, and I did find out that he's actually 3rd in terms of most penalties conceded out of any of the Crusaders for 2025. He is behind Antonio Chalfoun, as well as Cullen Grace, who is actually the most penalised Crusader of the season. 5 line-out steals for Scott Barrett, 12 dominant tackles, which I do think is important when you look at who the All Blacks will be playing later on this year. You've got to be physical, but you just got to make sure that penalty count stays a little bit lower. For Tuipulotu, he has been a busy man this year, having played 1,051 minutes. He too has made 12 dominant tackles. He's had 43 lineouts won with 2 lineout steals and has made 174 tackles throughout this year with a completion of 87%. He's got the experience in the All Blacks kit. I do think that having Barrett as well as Tuipulotu will be perfect in terms of building Fabian Holland into a great player, or an even greater player, I should say. The man is already looking like a superstar, and he's still got a massive career ahead of him. And I do think having those couple mentor-type roles for the 2 more experienced heads could be exactly what the young Holland needs. Tupavai, he has played 1,024 minutes throughout this year, so actually right up there in terms of the most minutes for any locks in the comp. Throughout that time, he has had 641 metres carried, 14 defenders beaten. He has had 10 offloads throughout this year, and that is an interesting stat to me, because if he's able to keep that ball alive in the international scene, it's a little bit similar to what Argeir Snyman does for the South Africans in terms of keeping the ball moving, not allowing oppositions into that breakdown. Of course, it can come with its own risks of possibly giving that ball away, but I mean, Tupavai throughout this year, he has been phenomenal in terms of just the progression as a player. He's given away 4 less penalties this year than he did last year, which I think is also a great step in the right direction. He had 55 lineouts won, 2 lineout steals, which is actually a little bit lower than I did expect, although one of the other Chiefs players, Naitoa Akoi, he has had 6 lineout steals throughout this year, and then I believe Josh Lord also has 5, so maybe Tupavai just not quite getting those chances there, but I do think that he'll be in the All Blacks squad, and I do think he'll be a very handy player to have in there. Fabian Holland, he's 6'8", so he's a massive bloke. He's made 192 tackles throughout this year, with 18 of them being dominant, so he does throw that weight and size around. He's had 37 lineouts won, but the one that stands out to me is the 7 lineout steals. If he can do that at international level and allow the All Blacks to get that counter-attack going, could be absolutely massive for them. So not only is he a massive individual, but he's got a massive gas tank to match, and I can't wait to see him in the All Blacks kit. But we move on now to the loose forwards. Now, I've got quite a few changes compared to what I selected in that last video. For myself, I do feel like there were better guys that could go in, although there is also that loyalty that may come with Scott Robertson's selections, but for me, I have gone Ardie Savia, Wallace Satiti, Duplessis Karefi, Summer Penny Finau, Peter Larkai, Luke Jacobson, and Simon Parker. Now, Parker might be a little bit of a grey area just because I'm not actually sure of the extent of his injury, but what he's offered for the Chiefs throughout this year, I do think is something that is quite unique compared to some of the other players that are around for that number 6 jersey, and I do think that's where you'd squeeze him in if you were to look at somewhere. Put Parker in the ABs. He has had 13 dominant tackles. He throws his weight around, and he's had a real breakout season. Doesn't give away a huge amount of penalties. Also just gets on with his work when he's out there, and he's been a bit of an underappreciated part of this Chiefs Super Rugby Pacific season. Also from the Chiefs, Luke Jacobson, 22 defenders beaten throughout this year for Luke Jacobson with 13 offloads, so a little bit similar to Tupovai, keeping that ball moving, and I do think that that's one of the big reasons that we've seen the Chiefs be so successful in terms of the points that they've scored throughout this year, is they just don't let the opposition have a chance to get possession. They just keep it moving, getting it out wide, and I mean, some of the guys that they've got in their back line, you can clearly understand why they did make it to the final. In terms of the penalty count for Luke Jacobson, I know that last year that was a real talking point, and he did still make the squad even with his ill discipline. This year he's only given away 6 penalties across his 936 minutes of playing, which is absolutely massive because last year he gave away 23, so 17 less penalties against Luke Jacobson. He's gone more into the captain's role this year and seems to have really stepped up in terms of leadership, as well as being a little bit more smarter in the way that he's been playing. He's versatile because he can play 8, 7, and 6, and I do think that Scott Robertson will find a spot for him, and I do think I would too if I was in charge of the All Blacks. Now, Summer Penny Finau, he's had 15 dominant tackles. He also every once in a while gives away a silly penalty. Now, if he can cut that out of his game, of course you want to see that physicality, but as long as it's controlled and not too emotional, his size at 6 can be hugely beneficial for the All Blacks when it comes to the lineouts. They didn't really use him a huge amount throughout when he was in the squad. It was for the July internationals, and then I believe he got taken out of the squad as the year progressed, and that's when we saw Wallace Satiti really take that number 6 jersey on. But Summer Penny Finau, just because of his size and physicality, I feel like he's that perfect guy to fit into 6, as it's often talked about moving one of the locks to 6 for that exact same reason. But if you got Finau there, I don't think they'll have to make that little reshuffle. Plus, the guys who are playing in lock at the moment, I believe, should stay there as they're having success in that position. And one thing that the All Blacks have done in the past, and it's something they've received a lot of criticism for, that is playing guys in their secondary positions rather than leaving them where they should. Wallace Satiti, I have no idea where they're going to play him this year in that loose forward trio, but one thing's for sure, he's going to be in the squad, unless there is, of course, some sort of injury in the final. He's only played 322 minutes throughout this season, 9 defenders beaten, 3 line breaks, and also has scored the try. He does get a lot of post-contact meters. He's physical. He is one of the future stars for the All Blacks, the 2024 Young Breakout Player of the Year. I look forward to seeing him in 2025 as well. Ardie Savia, what he's been able to do for Moana Pacifica throughout the season really can't be understated. He was able to change the mindset of that team, and they just continue to grow as a side. He did some pretty impressive work as an individual, but alongside the other two, Miracle Whaialangi and Samisi Tupo Taialoa in that loose forward trio, all 3 of them really did make an impact. But Savia, he's 3rd in the competition for turnovers won, sitting there with 19, 34 defenders beaten, 7 line breaks, 6 penalties conceded against him, so a pretty low number when you consider the turnovers won that he's been able to get. He's had 8 line-out wins, which is something that the All Blacks may look at as well as an option for Savia to be lifted in the line-out. And he also had 157 kicking meters throughout this year. Of course, we can all remember that try where he did the kicking behind, some impressive skill just to have it rolled out. But I do wonder whether or not if Savia is in space and he sees the opportunity in behind, whether he might sink the slipper into it and give it a boot in an international fixture. The other 2 that are remaining are the 2 for the Hurricanes, Duplessis Karefi as well as Peter Larkai. Now, Karefi, he's come a long way in the last couple years too. We were talking about Jacobson's discipline. Du Plessis Karefi this year only giving away the 5 penalties compared to the 15 that he gave away in 2023. He beat 23 defenders throughout this year. He won 23 turnovers, which was the second most in the whole competition. And he's also made the most tackles out of any player for Super Rugby Pacific with 220, and that is at a 91% accuracy. So pretty high percentage for the amount of tackles made. He's been solid in the breakdowns as proven by the 23 turnovers won. It is always talked about that people feel he's not big enough to be in the All Blacks. But I mean, Savi is probably the perfect example that sometimes it isn't so much the size of the player, but it's the size of the gas tank and the heart that the player has. I mean, he certainly isn't the biggest guy in the world, and it's always the comparison. How would he match up with Pieter-Steph du Toit? That's normally the one that people use as the argument. But the thing is, when you really think about it, who does match up with Pieter-Steph du Toit? Because in terms of size and freak athleticism, not many go even close to Pieter-Steph. So I don't think that that's the fair argument. And yes, they are going to be playing up against each other more than likely later on this year, but there's more to being in that loose forward trio than just pure muscle and size. There is also the strategy behind it, and I do think that Du Plessis Karefi, I do think that his strategy has got a lot better this year. He's been stepping up into the role as captain for the Canes too, and I look forward to seeing him in the All Blacks kit. Peter Larkai, I do think that his 2024 season was better, but then when you see his stats this year, it is still pretty incredible. 18 defenders beaten, 1,098 carry meters, so I mean, that's quite a few. 168 carries that man made. He was the same when he was in the NPC last year, as well as Super Rugby. Always finds his hands on the ball. He's made 10 dominant tackles, 171 tackles made, and has won 13 lineouts. Now, that is a stat that I wanted to mention because he could be a lineout option, whether or not that is in the number 6 jersey, like I've seen mentioned, or whether he's playing 7. Perhaps they could still use him as a threat at lineout time, and that's exactly what you want. A little bit of unpredictability when it comes to your jumpers. But those are the guys that I've gone with. A few guys who I think might be a little bit unlucky to miss out is maybe someone like an Ethan Blackadder, just because of his prior experience for the All Blacks. He does work hard out there on the field. He's got an 87% tackle completion throughout this year, which I was a bit surprised by, as I thought it might be a bit higher, but he does make quite a few dominant tackles throughout those ones made. Leo Willie, I do think could be one that Scott Robertson looks at potentially adding as a number 8 with also the ability to play 6. Speaking of 6s, Cullen Grace, I do think that that penalty count and a bit of a drop-off in form for the second half of the season might be why he misses out. Papali'i, he managed to make 212 tackles. He was actually second in the overall tackles made for the competition, but he has given away 14 penalties. Tom Christie with the highest tackle percentage out of any of these guys that I've been talking about with 96%. Also scored more tries than last year with 4, which was something that was talked about for Christie to improve upon. And then also an honourable mention for Sean Withy and also Satutu for the way that he's able to attack. But those are the loose forwards. Now we move on to the back line. We are able to have 15 players selected across these positions, starting with the halfbacks. I have gone with 3, and that is going to be Cam Roigard, Cortez Ratama, and also Noah Hotham. So Cam Roigard, he has made the most passes out of anyone in the competition with 1,142. He's also been very handy with those sniping runs round the breakdown. He did miss quite a bit of last year's Super Rugby competition, but anytime he's on the field, it just seems to bring the Hurricanes to that next level. He's a handy enough guy with a kick. So I do believe, just like last year, Razor will get him into the All Blacks team. Cortez Ratama, I found some very interesting stats about that man. And it wasn't just about the runs that he has made. He's had 6 tries, 11 defenders beaten, and 5 line breaks throughout this year. But the stat that I found the most interesting was his passes made. 823 with 98.7% accuracy. So that puts him at 5th place in overall passing accuracy throughout the season. Everyone else who's above him on that list, though, has had less than 200 passes. So Taufa Funaki, he has 99% with 198 passes. And then the man at number 1 is actually Riley Hohepa, who has 100% passing accuracy, but he's only made the 67 passes throughout his season. For the Hurricanes, he also ended up getting injured, so sadly couldn't expand upon that. But in terms of percentage of passes completed per minute, that's a bit of a mouthful, but he actually moves up to 4th rated in the overall standings. So in terms of that top 10, Cam Roigard and Noah Hotham both are outside of it for passing accuracy, but I just found that quite intriguing. And once again, when you think about the success that the Chiefs have had when it comes to their attack, having McKenzie and Ratama as that 19 combination, both being able to get multiple passes out of game does make a massive difference. Noah Hotham, he has had 8 dominant tackles throughout the season. I had to mention that stat. The man seems to have no fear. He will run at a prop and try and drive him backwards or a lock, and every once in a while, he can sit them down, which I do think is thoroughly impressive. He's had 20 defenders beaten throughout this year, 4 line breaks, and has really been working on a support run in terms of being that next guy. We see kicks in behind from Sever Reese throughout the season, as well as the occasional play from fly half. And normally one of the first guys there, if not the first, is Noah Hotham chasing down those different plays. So I do think in the All Blacks environment, having him and Beauden Barrett perhaps at some stage getting to work together could be quite an intriguing partnership that we could see for this year. But moving on to the fly halves. The first 5/8s. I did get told off multiple times for saying fly half as it was too confusing for some people. So hopefully that's taken away the confusion in terms of what position I'm talking about. The number 10s, you could even say, to simplify it more. But the 2 that I've selected here are Beauden Barrett and Damian McKenzie. No real surprises in terms of those 2 spots. Now, I'm actually going to read off Beauden Barrett and Damian McKenzie's stats at the same time for a little bit of a head-to-head comparison. In terms of points this year, we have seen Beauden get 112 compared to McKenzie's 207, which also puts him as the number 1 point scorer throughout the competition. Beauden Barrett off the kicking tee has had 73.3%. Damian McKenzie 80.6, which does put him as the 2nd highest in terms of accuracy across the top 10. The only man with a higher accuracy was Tom Liner with 87.2. So that man was absolutely nailing his kicks for the Reds. In terms of defenders beaten, Beauden Barrett has had 30. Damian McKenzie has had 59. Line breaks, 9 for Beauden Barrett with 11 for Damian McKenzie. And I know what you may be thinking, Beauden's not really winning a lot of these head-to-heads, but one that he does is tackle accuracy. 84% of his tackles made throughout this year, Beauden Barrett, compared to McKenzie, who has got 79%, which is still an improvement upon his 2024 season where it was 75. But I do still think they've both done enough to be in the All Blacks squad, and I do have a feeling that's the way that Scott Robertson may go as well. But moving on now to the centres, this is where I've made quite a few changes compared to what I feel maybe Scott Robertson would be selecting. But starting off, my first inside centre, gone with Quinn Tupaea. I feel like his season for the Chiefs has been outstanding. He's had 1,227 carry metres. He's beaten 35 defenders, had 13 line breaks, has only scored the 4 tries for himself, but the runs that he makes certainly have led to plenty more for this Chiefs side. He wasn't given the chance for the All Blacks in 2024, even though he was in sensational form, and I do think this year he has really stepped up. He's made an impact. He's made a statement that says he should be within that All Blacks environment. The next man has certainly done just that as well. I didn't mention him in the Razor selection, as I do feel like maybe Scott Robertson will go with his more experienced guys in that regard, but he would be crazy not to put this man in the team, and that is a man by the name of Timothy Tavatavanawai. Throughout the season for the Highlanders, he has been a standout. He's had over 1,000 metres carried throughout this year. He's played 1,177 minutes throughout this season, which puts him right up there in terms of some of the most minutes out of any player in the competition. But there are a couple numbers next that are absolutely insane, and that is 78 defenders beaten. 78. That is a huge amount for one individual. It would be a huge amount for 2 or 3 players in a team. But Timothy Tavatavanawai, such a dangerous ball runner, whether he's in the centres or out on the wing, which I do think is why I'll give a bit of a spoiler, I've gone with 5 centres rather than the 4, and that is because of Timothy Tavatavanawai's ability to be able to play wing too. He has got 26 turnovers won. That puts him as number 1 for turnovers won in this season. His ability to get over the ball and rip it away has been outstanding. He's given away 14 penalties, but still averages about 1.9 turnovers per game. So in terms of the comparison, you're still in that scenario. He could win you a game with a crucial turnover, just like we saw for the Highlanders earlier on in the season. He's also had 14 offloads, so likes to keep the ball alive, but just an insane talent that I would hate to see go overseas because he's not given the chance for the AB. So, Timothy Tavatavanawai, he's in my side, and I really hope he's in Scott Robertson's side as well. The last of the inside centres, I have got Jordie Barrett. Now, there are people thinking maybe he could be left out of the July internationals due to the amount of games that he's played for Leinster in the URC, but I do still think that Razor will at least have him in that environment, so he might be one of the guys that do get selected. But for Leinster throughout this season, he has been a standout. 5 tries, 17 defenders beaten. He's also won 5 turnovers, so he's done some work in the breakdown, which normally 5 turnovers you'd say is pretty handy. But then you got old Timothy over there getting 26, which kind of shows up absolutely everyone. But Jordie with his kicking as well, that big boot, something that the All Blacks could use to their advantage if they're trying to play a bit of territory. And I do think that if they've got Jordie Barrett in the starting lineup, having either Timothy Tavatavanawai or Quinn Tupaea off the bench could really bring a great impact for the All Blacks throughout this year. But we move on to the outside centres now. I've gone Billy Proctor as my first. 38 defenders beaten throughout this year. And the interesting part of that is he's actually number 1 in the overall standings for defenders beaten per 80 minutes of rugby played. He's only played 517 minutes this season. That was due to the injury that we did see that kept him out for the first half of the season, but he beats 5.9 defenders per 80 minutes, and like I said, that actually puts him at number 1 in terms of minute-by-minute defenders beaten throughout the whole competition. The man, as my other outside centre, it might cause a little bit of controversy, because by selecting this man, it means that I haven't gone with a guy who's got a lot of experience for the All Blacks, who has been, I guess, a mainstayer for them throughout the last few years. But I've switched, and I've gone Daniel Rona as my number 13 option. I think that Rona has been such an underappreciated and I honestly think underestimated part of this Chiefs side for quite some time. The man statistically has been putting on time after time some great performances, but never really gets the spotlight. There's always been that guy for the Chiefs that maybe does that little bit more in the match or scores one more try or something along those lines. That then means that Daniel Rona just kind of fades into the background. But for me, he's within the top 3 outside centres in New Zealand at the moment. He's had 19 defenders beaten throughout this season, which just in comparison to Rieko Ioane, that is 5 more defenders beaten for Rona. He's had 13 clean breaks, which in comparison to Ioane is 5 extra. And then he's also had the 4 try assists compared to Rieko, who has had the big 0 for try assists throughout this year. And then in terms of tries, Daniel Rona has got 6. So actually right up there with Ioane in terms of that statistic as well. They've got the same percentage for their tackling with 82%. Now I do know that Rico's tackling on defence is normally the reason that people put him into their All Black side, even when he wasn't scoring tries throughout last year. But the fact that Rona offers you that same percentage, as well as being able to beat more defenders, have more clean breaks, more try assists, which means more opportunity on the outside for your wingers, I feel like it's the perfect switch to be able to make. Rieko also going overseas to Leinster next year for his sabbatical. So maybe this is the time that you decide to chuck a new guy in there and see what Daniel Rona can do for the ABs. Now, unfortunately, as much as I tried to, there was no way to find a spot for AJ Lamb in this side. Now, I would have loved to have him in my All Blacks team. He's had 34 defenders beat him throughout the year, 10 line breaks, 3 try assists. He can also play out on the wing, which is where I was actually initially trying to find a spot for him in this All Blacks side, because of the fact that he actually started as a winger and found some real success there. But I just couldn't squeeze him in. Unless, of course, if they don't select Jordie Barrett due to him needing a bit more rest time, then that is where I put AJ Lamb straight into the side, as I do feel he would be the perfect fit. But now we move on to the outside backs, and due to my selections that I've made so far, it means that I can only have 5 outside backs, and they are going to be as follows. I've gone Caleb Clark, Imoni Narawa, Leroy Carter, Ruben Love, and also Will Jordan. So straight away you'd say I'm a little bit light for wingers, but the thing is, in the All Blacks environment before, we've seen Will Jordan play out on the right wing. They've also got, with my selection, Timothy Tavatavanawai, who could find himself in that right wing position, and I do think he'd do just as well as a few of the other guys I could have selected. Someone who missed out with the way that I've selected it is Sevu Reece. He scored 8 tries throughout this year for the Crusaders. But one thing that normally gets Reece into the ABs as well, I feel, is his ability to get turnovers in the breakdowns. But you've got Timothy Tavatavanawai that if he's put on the wing, averaging 1.9, like I said, in terms of turnovers per game, that kind of makes up for not having Sevu Reece in the side. Do I think that Razor won't select Reece though? Probably not. I think that he'll put Sevu in his team. But if you wanted that something a little different, perhaps that could be what I have said here. Kini Naholo, if he didn't end up with his injury, I also think could have been quite close to making this All Blacks team. But Caleb Clark, this year for him at the Blues has been a little bit lackluster. But I'm basing my selection of him off what he did throughout 2024. In Super Rugby, he had 1,220 carry meters, 51 defenders beaten, and 23 clean breaks. Now, this year, he has been nowhere near that. For the All Blacks last year, he was outstanding as well. A lot of people selecting him as their number 11 of the year. I do just want to quickly brush upon it, and I do want to say that Caleb Clark's slightly poor season, I don't think is just down to him. When you look at some of those numbers that I was talking about earlier on, 0 try assists for Rieko Ioane. How many times has Ioane had the chance to pass to Clark on the outside, but has decided to run it instead? It is actually slightly concerning the amount of times that has happened. Clark, I believe, throughout this whole Super Rugby season, hasn't even got a single try. But I think with the right players at number 12 and 13, as well as a great 9 and 10 combination, I honestly think that if they put Clark in the All Blacks from the games that they'll be playing this year, he's scoring at least 8 tries. There we go. That's a very bold prediction that I'm probably going to regret, but we're going to go with 8 tries for Caleb Clark in the All Blacks this year if they give him the chance and if they get the selection right for the back line that is around him. My other 2 wingers, Imoni Narawa, have an 873 carry meters throughout this year, 25 defenders beaten, 12 line breaks, and the stat that really impressed me with Imoni Narawa was his efficiency when it came to his tackling, 93%, and that was a lot higher than a majority of the other wingers throughout the competition, but the man just doesn't seem to miss. And the other benefit, if you really want to get technical, you could say he can play 13. Imoni Narawa playing there for Bay of Plenty. Perhaps that's the way that you get AJ Lamb or Sevu Reece into the side, is by making that switch for Narawa and considering him as an outside centre. I don't think I want to see it though, just based off what he's been able to do for the Chiefs out on the wing. But if we know the All Blacks and we know what they've done in the past, that is a possibility that they may be looking into. Leroy Carter, one of the breakout players of this season. I would be thoroughly disappointed if he doesn't make the All Blacks. He's had 43 defenders beaten, 14 clean breaks, 9 tries. The interesting stat that I found with him was actually his tackle completion. It's only 79%. Now, as a guy from the 7 circuit, I actually thought that would be a little higher, plus some of the outstanding one-on-one tackles that he's made throughout the year. So I'm not actually too sure where most of those missed tackles have come from, whether or not that's rushing up and ending up missing or what the go is there. But I think even with that slightly lower percentage, you'd still stick him in the team. He's also very strong at getting over the ball, winning those turnovers, and just has pure physicality that he likes to bring to the game. He was the same when he was playing for the All Blacks Sevens. Breakout season here for the Chiefs. Chuck him in the All Blacks as a potential bolter. But the last two players are both fullbacks, or at least I am playing them as fullbacks for this year. Ruben Love and also Will Jordan. Will Jordan, he's had 1,141 carry meters throughout this year, 9 tries and 37 defenders beaten, 14 line breaks. Alongside that, it was great to see him back for the Crusaders, seeing as he did miss all of last year's Super Rugby Pacific. He's got the vision from the back. He actually works really nicely with Beauden Barrett too, so that might be something that they do look at using. But Will Jordan, he's going to be in there somewhere, and I feel like predicting 8 tries for him would actually seem a little bit light compared to what he can do when he is in full form. Ruben Love, he's solid under the high ball, and he also has some great vision from the back. He's got a decent kicking game when he's getting it right. Also offers you the goal kicking, which could be something to look at. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it might actually be about the same, if not maybe slightly higher than Beauden Barrett's for this year. His tackling percentage is 74%, which is a little bit lower, but we've got to remember most of the time he's in those one-on-one situations where he's got no chance because of a massive break from the opposition. But I also do think with that tackle completion rate, they might consider moving him to 10, as he did show for the Hurricanes that he's more than capable in that role and actually grew into it as the season did progress, just to then go back to 15 when Brett Cameron did return. But I think either way, you want to have someone like a Ruben Love in the side. Definitely with Barrett getting older, you want to look at who that next guy could be, and whether it's Ruben Love, whether it's Reves Reihana, Josh Jacob, Cam Miller, Harry Godfrey. But I do think Ruben Love, if he makes that transition smoothly, could end up as a great number 10 or, in fact, the 15 role as well. But nonetheless, that is my All Black squad, ladies and gentlemen. I've just seen how long the recording is, so I do apologise for rambling a little bit. We definitely went more in depth in terms of some of the statistics than I did for my Scott Robertson selection. So if you are still here, of course, it is greatly appreciated to let me know that you are still here. Be sure to write a comment saying how many tries you think Caleb Clarke will score for this season. And anyone who does that, of course, we will know that you have watched right up till the end. But I do thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, of course, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We will be announcing the squad when it takes place, Monday, the 23rd of June, around midday. I'm excited to see does make it in the team. But thank you all very much for being here, and I will see you all for the next one.